Welcome to the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. Matt Zemek with Ethan Inman and Crashlet Collier. And wait a minute, this is like NFL Red Zone. It's a quad box. New feature tonight. And you might be wondering, who's the fourth guy? He's wearing a Notre Dame sweatshirt. Well, that's Jeffrey Clark. He is the Notre Dame beat writer for us at the Voice of College Football, vocfb.com. Jeffrey writing about Notre Dame and also big national stories as well. He's doing 2 stories a day every single day. So like he's been I'm tempted to say Shohei Ohtani, but really I think you have to say the Teoscar Hernandez of the Voice of College Football, since Teoscar's the one hitting the clutch dingers in October. And we're glad you're joining us instead of watching the Dodger bullpen trying to hang on to a lead in Milwaukee. You've made the right choice. It's Notre Dame week here at the USC channel. So we're thrilled to have Jeffrey Clark with us. And so, usually I'm asking Ethan and Crash about their takes, but tonight we're asking Jeffrey for his takes on Notre Dame, the USC game, the future of the rivalry. We're certainly going to get into that as well. So much to talk about in this hour. We remind you, we're going to be here for a second hour. Not Jeffrey, but the three of us, Ethan, myself, and Crash. We'll be here for a second hour, but you need to donate $150 in super chats to make that happen. Jeffrey's here for an hour, but if you want to get our takes, we'll stick around for a second hour, but $150 will be needed to make that happen. Also, go to vocfb.com/shop, and we want you to get USC caps, but there are also Notre Dame caps. For any Irish fans that are watching, go to vocfb.com/shop. If you're an Irish fan, get a Notre Dame cap. That supports the Notre Dame channel. It also supports the Voice of College Football company as well. And finally, our USC YouTube page at the Voice of College Football. Join at the middle Heisman tier, the top national champion tier. You get exclusive bonus cuts from myself, Ethan Inman, and Crashlet Collier. We're producing a number of them. We're going to do some more as the season goes along. That's another way to support the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. All right, let's talk. Let's talk some ball. So, Ethan, you're up first with a question for Jeffrey Clark, our Notre Dame beat writer at the Voice of College Football.
Sure. So, Jeffrey, my first question for you was just, the Notre Dame defense kind of struggled in the first few weeks, and it was against some great opponents, in Miami and in Texas A&M. But I was just curious, from like a Notre Dame fan's perspective, how confident you guys are feeling, because, obviously the results have improved, but, it hasn't been against necessarily like a top 5 opponent like you guys played in the first few weeks. So where's your confidence level? Where would you say Notre Dame fans' confidence level is in the defense at this point in the season?
Well, first of all, I got to say thank you, Matt, for having me on after that long, lovely introduction. I would be remiss if I did not thank you for having me on, and I want to thank you, too, for asking me about my team here. As far as how we're confident in the defense, definitely more confident than we were at the start of the season. Like you said, the quality of the first 2 opponents, it speaks for itself right now. Miami and Texas A&M were not as highly ranked as they are now, as they were when they played Notre Dame. But I feel like if Notre Dame's defense was going to get back on track, it had to be against the schedule that it has played since then. Because you've got Purdue, you've got Arkansas, you've got Boise State, you've got NC State. All teams that, no disrespect to any of them at all, but they're all in kind of a weird place right now. Purdue's coming off just an awful season. And, I had a chance to see them lose badly to Notre Dame last year in West Lafayette. Arkansas, of course, they fired their coach immediately after losing to Notre Dame. Boise State is Boise State against Power 4 program, so take that for what it is. NC State, a decent program, but not on the same level as Notre Dame. So as far as confidence is concerned, definitely a lot better than what we were experiencing, because the start of the year we were taking a look at like all of these players in Notre Dame secondary, especially Christian Gray, Leonard Moore, and these are guys with NFL prospects. Christian Gray will go in the next draft. Leonard Moore will go the year after that, and Bubakar Traore as well. He's coming off a serious injury from last year. He just won an award this past week maybe a couple weeks ago, whatever it was, for defensive comeback player. I think it was the month for September. But in any event, with the talents that they have and the opponents that they're playing, there's really no way that they should not have performed up to their preseason expectations the way they did. I mean, they slipped a little bit against Purdue and they gave up 30 points, but they've given up no more than 13 points in every game since then. So I'd say compared to the start of the year when you, Matt, were calling for Chris Ash's job already, even though he was brand new, I'd say the criticism for him has been fended off at least for a little bit.
So, Jeffrey, my question is, I want to ask, when you look at Notre Dame, obviously they lost to two teams who are now in the top 5 of the AP poll. Would you say since then, even despite it being not as strong competition, would you say that Notre Dame do they look better? Are they playing better because they've improved as a team talent wise, or is it because of the drop off in opponent talent?
I mean, I think that, obviously they're playing better because, they are a good team, there's no two ways about it. But I think that the bigger thing is what happened last year is happening again this year, which is that they put themselves in an early hole, so they have no choice but to win out. Last year, of course, everybody remembers when they lost to Northern Illinois, which, I was present for. I got to be honest, I was a little shocked about that, as everybody else was. Your name tree named them their little cow of the week, understandably so. But Notre Dame realized after that they had to win every single game in order to get to the college football playoff, and to their credit, they did just that. And they made all the way to the national title game. Same story this year. Texas A&M, Miami, like you said, they're teams in the top 4 right now in the AP poll. Even though these are quality opponents, and let's be honest, I can't remember the last time at this point in the season when a team's only 2 losses were against teams that were in the top 4 at this point in the season. So I'd say that's definitely an outlier. I think the fact that they have a chip on their shoulder, they realize that every game from here on is a must-win game. That is what has motivated them. And Notre Dame under Marcus Freeman, for whatever reason, kind of has gotten off to slow starts. You might remember during his first full season there, they lost to a quality opponent at the start of the year, but then they lose to Marshall in their home opener, and not everybody was expecting that. So they had to wait till the next week against California to get his first win as the Irish head coach. So I don't know what it is with slow starts and Notre Dame under Marcus Freeman, but to his credit, over the past couple of years, I think he's matured as a head coach. I mean, you kind of have to mature fast as a head coach if you're going to be the head coach in Notre Dame. But, just like last year, they had that chip on their shoulders that they have to win out. And, maybe they realized that, maybe they buy into their hype just a little bit, and maybe other teams catch them by surprise, even though, like I said, Texas A&M and Miami this year are a lot better than Notre Dame was, or Northern Illinois was last year. So I think that drive to win and knowing they have to win in order to qualify for the college football playoff was motivating them more than anything else. Although, to be completely fair, some teams that were ranked ahead of them have suddenly dropped off. So I'd say, obviously Notre Dame wants to beat USC this weekend, but even if USC beats them, then there's that slight outside chance because of what has happened with Penn State and Texas and the like that, maybe they'll be a 3-win playoff team. I doubt it, but just that motivation to win. Plus, after USC, there's no other ranked team currently on their schedule. So they have that chip on their shoulders. That's what's motivating them more than anything else, in my opinion. They have to win out in order to make the playoff realistically.
All right, Jeffrey. So, you've covered Notre Dame for several years. You used to work at Fighting Irish Wire. Now you're covering Notre Dame for us at the Voice of College Football, doing an absolutely fantastic job. So you have your finger on the pulse of the program. I think one thing a lot of USC fans looking in would be really interested in, kind of like going behind the scenes, behind the ropes, as it were. Like, what was Marcus Freeman's thought process in terms of replacing Al Golden? When Al Golden went to the Cincinnati Bengals and the NFL, and he had to fill that vacancy on his staff, Tell me anything you gleaned or that you saw in terms of just the process of hiring Chris Ash. Like how wide a net did Marcus Freeman cast? Did it come down to 2 candidates, 3, 4? Was there a plan A that fell through and Chris Ash was the plan B? Any whispers behind the scenes in terms of how that process unfolded? And obviously people would want to know that just for its own sake. But the other really interesting detail, as you're quite aware of, is that Al Golden did man coverage and Chris Ash went to zone, and that led to some confusion early in the season. But obviously Marcus Freeman, former defensive coordinator, a defense first guy, so he had to sign off on that, right? He had to be okay with that. So that adds kind of to the mystery, the intrigue about Marcus Freeman's thought process in hiring Chris Ash to replace Al Golden. So just take us inside that process and what you saw, what you read, what you felt was happening all along the way.
I mean, you kind of have to take a look at it from the perspective of the support that he gets from the university. Notre Dame, as you know, takes a lot of pride in not only its athletic programs, but in its academic reputation, as well as its bottom line. And, there have been some leadership changes at the university over the past couple of years. They have a new president, they have a new athletic director who coincidentally used to be the chairman at NBC Sports, which obviously has a strong relationship with Notre Dame. But if you go back, a couple of years, it seems like every time that Marcus Freeman has to replace a coordinator, he's not always getting what many people consider to be the best candidate for the job. And I think a lot of that has to do with the support that he gets from his bosses. I mean, Marcus Freeman, obviously the best known person currently at Notre Dame. Any Notre Dame football head coach, they're going to be the biggest name at the university no matter what. They might have the president ahead of them, they might have the athletic director ahead of them, all these people ahead of them, but at the end of the day, he is the face of the university. But that doesn't mean necessarily that he gets to do everything that he wants. I mean, maybe, obviously I'm not going to pretend to know what went into that because, I wasn't there. But, I think, and this is just a hypothesis on my part, I think that he, like any other head coach, whether at the pro level or college or high school, they're going to go with somebody that is going to greatly align with their philosophy. Was Chris Ash the best person to do that? I mean, maybe. I'm not going to pretend that I was in on these interviews, or whoever any of our serious candidate was is kind of irrelevant because Chris Ash is here. But I think the bigger thing that you have to consider is, as the season goes on, if you are a good coaching staff, if you want to be a good coaching staff, then you have to constantly communicate with what we want to do, what philosophy do we want to preach, what plays do we want to run, what schemes do we want to run. And maybe, and again, this is just a guess, maybe after the Texas A&M loss, which was a very close loss, maybe Freeman and Ash got together, talked things out, and decided, okay, the schedule is getting easier, but, if we play like we did these first couple of games, we're not going to have a chance to recover from this. So what we need to do now is we need to play, and this goes back to my earlier point, like, this is the last game of the season every time. I mean, what went into any change that might have made, I don't know. But, obviously something has worked because, with Freeman being a defensive first coach and Chris Ash being the man in charge of the defense, something had to have clicked between the Texas A&M loss and now, because we are seeing a much different defense than what we saw at the start of the season, kind of back to your point there, Ethan. So I think, as far as decision makers go, I think that the people in charge now might have more of an incentive to spend. But overall, it kind of goes back to when Brian Kelly left, the coaches at the mercy of the bureaucracy at the university. And if they feel like it's going to cost too much money to spend this much money on this coordinator, then they're going to tell them to look elsewhere. And unfortunately, that probably comes at the expense of success for the program. But, it's a small price to pay, unfortunately, whether he likes it or not, to be the head coach at the University of Notre Dame.
Yeah, I'm going to kick it to Ethan for another question, in our rotating series of questions among the three of us. But just before that, I just want to throw in this note. Penn State is paying a defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles, $3.1 million in overall compensation. So it's just interesting to get your perspective, Jeffrey, on Notre Dame and where it draws the line, what it's willing to spend versus, Penn State throwing all this money at Jim Knowles and then now paying James Franklin a buyout of close to $50 million. It really puts in perspective the arms race and how much are various programs willing to spend. It's a really interesting topic in college football. All right, Ethan, your next question for Jeffrey Clark here at the Voice of College Football.
Sure. So I have a whole list of questions, but one of them that was on my list that I'm going to ask now because it is kind of being talked about in the chat. So we have Daniel Paoli saying that he thinks that this game is going to be a shootout. So I'm just curious what your opinion is on the vibe of this game. Daniel also predicted a USC 52 to Notre Dame 49 score. Do you think it's going to be a shootout? Do you agree with Daniel? Do you feel like it's going to be more of a dogfight? Do you think, and a low scoring defensive battle? Do you think it's going to be somewhere in the middle? What are your thoughts on that?
So it's very interesting that you brought this up, and somebody who covers the Irish, I want to say it was Tyler Horka of Blue Gold Illustrated. I'm going to try and pull this up here. CJ Carr is doing everything he possibly can to prove that he is not only a true freshman, but he is a true freshman that can get the job done. And if you have been paying any attention to Notre Dame over the past month, you will see that he is worth the preseason, the recruiting hype that a lot of people were giving him. And I'm sorry, it was not Tyler Horka, it was Pete Sampson of The Athletic, who I have had a chance to meet. Tyler as well. Both really good guys. So let me read this tweet from Pete Sampson, the Notre Dame beat reporter for The Athletic. He specifically said this was for discussion purposes, interestingly enough. Looking ahead to the second half of the season for CJ Carr, he ranks number 7 nationally in pass efficiency. For every remaining opponent for Notre Dame in the regular season, so USC, Boston College, Navy, Pittsburgh, Syracuse, and Stanford, none of them ranks higher than 89th, and that is Pittsburgh. USC ranks 100th. So I guess the question is, will any of these teams, including USC, have the manpower at quarterback to match up with what CJ Carr has been able to accomplish to this point? And, Notre Dame's been waiting for a very long time to brag about a really young quarterback that has pretty much lifted the offense and made it better. And CJ Carr, at least so far, has been living up to that hype. As far as the shootout is concerned, they 41 points is the most points they've given up this year. They got up 27 in the loss to Miami. They gave up 30 against Purdue. But like I said earlier, since then, they have given up 27 points total. So over the past 3 games, Notre Dame has given up as many points as the fewest number of points that they gave up in any of the first 3 games. So, will it be a shootout? It could be. But if Notre Dame's defense is anything like what we have seen over the past few weeks, especially, then, maybe not. That means USC's defense is going to have to try and neutralize CJ Carr. Can they do that, I guess, is the question. We saw USC just did a pretty good job at handling Michigan, but Michigan, Notre Dame, they're pretty similar, I would say, in the rankings and pretty similar as far as talent. Michigan doesn't have all the drama with it, but, that's neither here nor there. But I think, will it be a shootout? If I had to bet money on it, and I'm not advocating betting money because I'm not that kind of person, I would say, no, it's not going to be a shootout. It will be either a defensive struggle or one team is going to get way ahead of the other.
Jeffrey, I'm really interested in obviously there's been a lot of talk this offseason about just what's going to happen to this rivalry after this season. Obviously, it's one of the things that makes college football very special. And one person I talked to this summer on my podcast Behind the Caution Tape was Petros Papadakis, who is very upset about this. And I'm wondering, what's been kind of the feeling of Notre Dame? What of, Marcus Freeman? What of players? What's just the general feel on the Notre Dame campus about about this rivalry, what it means to them, and what they think of what USC has been saying?
So I believe the most recent thing that Marcus Freeman has said, which I think he said yesterday or very recently at one of his news conferences, is that Notre Dame is all for keeping this rivalry going. From all indications, no Notre Dame player, coach, fan wants to see this rivalry go away. I mean, it is, after all, one of the most historic rivalries in college football. Like, only Notre Dame's rivalry with Navy can rival it. No pun intended there. But everything that I have seen, and again, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Matt, or anyone else can correct me on this, is that it seems like Lincoln Riley does not seem as keen on keeping this rivalry going as much as the athletic director at USC. So what that tells me is that, the person who is ultimately responsible for making the decision seems to be putting more stock in this rivalry than the person who is the face of the program and thus the face of USC. And it kind of goes back to what I said earlier. The coach is the face of not only the team, but pretty much the entire university. But at the same time, Lincoln Riley cannot fire the athletic director. Only the athletic director can fire Lincoln Riley. So I feel like if push came to shove, the athletic director does have a responsibility and, dare I say, an obligation to keep this rivalry going. Because, let's face it, college football, as we knew it even 5 years ago, is no longer. With nil deals and super conferences, and a lot of longtime college football fans, including our mutual friend Nick Shepkowski, have not been happy about all the changes going on in college football. In fact, Bob Valvano, the brother of the late Jim Valvano, had me on ESPN Louisville a few years ago because I wrote a story for Fighting Irish Wire about how college football, as we know, is not going to be around any longer and how bad that is. So, that was really fun. But I do feel like that, since Notre Dame seems all keen on keeping this rivalry going, USC has an obligation to feel the exact same way. And not only that, there's a need, I think, to keep this game going at the respective stadiums, Notre Dame Stadium and the LA Memorial Coliseum, respectively. Because, Matt, I tagged you in a tweet earlier about how it seems like Netflix seemed to want to bid for the rights for this game, which I'm completely against, because then Netflix is going to take it to like SoFi Stadium or something like that, which would completely go against the spirit of this rivalry. You two don't know this, but Matt knows this. But a year and a half ago, I and my wife's insisting actually got to tour the Memorial Coliseum, and the plaques they have out there. They have plaques. Maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but they have plaques.
Yeah. This is an education point for younger, USC fans, also Notre Dame fans. Like, how many young people under, let's say, 30, 35 years old know the things that, Jeffrey, you're about to share with our audience?
Okay, let's see, where should I start from? Okay, I'll just stick with this point for purposes of this discussion. By the way, the tour was me and my wife and a man from Scotland. That was it. But it was a Monday during the eclipse a year and a half ago, if you remember that. But again, there's a lot of USC history that's marked everywhere, but all those plaques, usually you think of, USC legends or Los Angeles legends or markers that have happened, right there at the Coliseum, like the Olympics or Billy Graham. But just go back to what I just said. Newt Rockney has a plaque out there. I believe it was one of the first ones out there, and the plaque says something like, Notre Dame was his field, but college football was really his field. And Frank Leahy has a plaque out there as well. So what that tells me is that USC historically has had great respect for Notre Dame. And if this rivalry comes to an end, what are those plaques for, really? Just to relic of a time gone by? I'm not a fan of that.
Now, before I allow Ethan to ask another question, I actually need to get Ethan's input on this. Jeffrey, you talked about your impressions of what the power dynamic is internally at USC in terms of whether Jen Cohen or Lincoln Riley is really driving this bus. Ethan, you can offer a pretty informed set of observations on this. So how would you assess the power dynamic internally at USC relative to whether this series with Notre Dame goes forward? Does the buck stop with Lincoln Riley or Jen Cohen, or is it pretty much split down the middle?
So I think that Lincoln Riley's influence over this game continuing is not super large. I think that, when he was asked about it at Big Ten Media Days, he said, "Do I want to play the game? Hell yeah, I want to play the game. That's one of the reasons I came, but also my allegiance is to USC, and I'm going to do everything in my power to help USC." So that sounds like, he wants everyone to believe that he wants to play the game. And he was also kind of deferring to, whatever the university decides, I'm going to kind of go along with, because, it's what's in the best interest of the university. So it feels like he was kind of alluding to the fact that he trusts Jen Cohen to make that decision. I just think also just based on what USC is seeking out, because, we know that over the course of trying to continue this rivalry, they've tried to get it moved to a neutral location. They've tried to, just so that USC doesn't have to travel as far, they've tried to get, the new TV network like Netflix involved, and, tried to make money that way. So it feels like it's more of like a financial and travel calculus, and not as much of a football calculus, not as much of a we're scared that we're not going to make the playoff if we play Notre Dame type of vibe. A lot of people don't, in the USC fan base, don't want USC to take that approach, because that's not the USC standard. That's not the USC attitude. USC's attitude historically has been, let's play, anybody, anywhere, and we're willing to take that on. So, USC doesn't kind of want to be lumped in with a lot of the SEC schools who schedule real cupcake games with their 3 non-conference games. So I think it's probably mostly Cohen's decision, and there's a lot, and it's probably mostly financial. So that would be my take on it.
All right, Ethan, your next question for Jeffrey Clark here at the Voice of College Football.
Yeah, so I have a question about Ashton Craig, because I just saw that he's going to be out for this game. He's obviously Notre Dame's starting center. Just curious how you think his absence is going to impact Notre Dame. Just kind of who's going to step up and replace him. I'm sure, who they're going to tab to replace him at center. How confident are you in him? Just how's it going to affect Notre Dame's game plan, that kind of thing. How do you think his absence is going to impact this game?
Well, as far as who's going to replace him, I literally just wrote about this in my story for today. So again, go to vocfb.com if you want to read all my stuff, my Notre Dame stuff, as well as my national college stuff. But the consensus seems to be that sophomore Joe Otting is going to be the starter for the moment. Another option is freshman Cam Herron. Herron has not played any games. Otting has 10 games for the Irish under his belt, 3 of them coming this season. And I did do some thinking about this, and it's going to be very, very interesting to see how the dynamic of the offense changes, because the center, he's the center for a reason. He is the center of the offense. The quarterback gets all the glory, but the center is at the center of what makes that offensive line click. And backs receivers will always be the first ones to tell you that they do not do what they can do without the help of their offensive line. So, that's years of me talking to high school players. I've covered high school sports coming out there. But I feel like, the dynamic with the offense, we're really going to learn a lot about the depth that the Irish have and how much chemistry. Let's face it, the chemistry that has developed between Craig and Carr, understand it's not something you can replicate. And they have to try on very short notice to try and replicate that chemistry, or at least come close to it, to ahead of what is going to be their biggest game of the season. The offensive line has done a really good job at protecting CJ Carr, and I know that he is going to put all the trust he can in his offensive line to give him all the time that he needs. But the problem is, Craig was a veteran in there, and now you have to rely on underclassmen in order to give you the ball. And college football, obviously very unpredictable. You never know when a bad snap can happen at an opportune time, especially in a close game. And it's it only takes one of those in order to flip, not only the game, but in the case for Notre Dame, the entire season. So, I'm going to be very interested to see, what happens between those two. And, it's going to be really a heck of a game in order to try and figure this out, because, if Notre Dame loses to USC, I've said it ad nauseum at this point, their season is 99.9% likely over with. So, to have to try and take snaps from a completely different guy when you've got a sold-out crowd and the entire country's watching, and it's your big rival, and, their fans are going to bring just as much energy as your own fans are, I am not envying CJ Carr right now, honestly, at least as far as this situation goes.
Jeffrey, what I'm curious about is regarding USC's defense, which has had its struggles at times. Obviously, really great performance all around against Michigan, but had some struggles against Illinois. Which players, especially on the receiving core, should USC really be worried about? Or is it going to be more of a running game? Because I'm really curious. Does Notre Dame try to exploit USC's secondary that's been struggling and kind of weak? Granted, they have Kamari Ramsey back now, hopefully praying he doesn't get food poisoning. And Alex Graham hopefully is, able to see more of the field after, after now being back and being more healthy. Should USC be more worried about the run game from Notre Dame or the pass game?
So my initial instinct is to say look out for Jeremiah Love, because he is an NFL talent for certain. He's leading the Irish in touchdowns there. Leading rusher, obviously, and he's got a good backup in Jadarian Price right behind him. Those two are going to be must-watches for a USC fan who's not overly familiar with Notre Dame, because if they get openings, it's goodbye right to the end zone, or at least they are going to try their hardest to make sure that they don't get tackled before they reach the end zone. But if that pass game is lacking for USC defensively, then definitely look for the Irish to open things up. At the start of the season, all of my attention was on Malachi Fields, the transfer receiver who also has NFL aspirations. And, he has definitely done a lot to show that he is worth that NFL hype. Jordan Faison, who is also a lacrosse player, he's a great player to take a look at if you are a USC fan who's interested in Notre Dame's receivers. Jaden Greathouse, he missed the last game because he had an injury. So he's a real wild card here. I mean, he'll definitely have his moments if, he gets his opportunities. But recently, what I've been most impressed by is Will Pauling. He's another transfer receiver who didn't do a whole lot at the start of the season, but over the past 3 games, he has a touchdown in each game. And if you are a USC fan and you're not looking at Will Pauling right now, then definitely look at him at this very moment, because he has very quickly ascended to the rankings as far as key Notre Dame backs and receivers. As far as receiving touchdowns, he is tied with Jeremiah Love with 3 receiving touchdowns. And I will also be remiss if I did not mention Eli Reardon, the tight end. He is literally the only tight end who is going to be a threat as far as receiving goes, because the rest of them are either trying to get healthy or they are blocked first. Which is really weird, because Notre Dame in recent years, who you've been paying attention to them as a USC crowd, Notre Dame has turned out one NFL quality tight end after another. Eli Reardon is finally the man at that position this year, but the problem is the big drop off after him at that position. But I've mentioned all these other weapons they have at receiver, so it's kind of a moot point. If USC is indeed struggling with the secondary, Notre Dame recognizes that after a quarter, maybe after the entire first half, then definitely look in the second half for them to open the game up, because that's what happened against NC State. They were up only 10-7 at the half, but they really opened it up in the second half. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact they were able to open up their passing game. Will Pauling is a guy that you really want to take a look at. Again, Malachi Fields, obviously, Jordan Faison. So, Notre Dame has some weapons. The question is, are they going to be able to find enough holes in order to exploit any struggles that USC might have? Personally, if they start opening it up and USC secondary is weak, I'd say the answer to that question is a big yes.
Yeah, so it seems as though, Jeffrey, you're leaning toward the thought process of Notre Dame should hunt favorable matchups. It's less about Notre Dame doing what it normally does. It's more about exploiting what it sees as a weakness in USC's defense. But let's go inside Notre Dame's play selection, the way Notre Dame likes to play on offense. I mean, you're watching Notre Dame games every week. The NC State game was a Peacock-only exclusive, correct?
Right.
Yeah, so no USC fans watched that game. So take us inside. Since you were watching it and we weren't, what are some of the concepts, the lines of attack that Notre Dame usually uses? Screen game, short passing, intermediate passing. How often do they use the deep ball? How balanced are they in terms of going up the middle through the A gap, running outside the tackles, going to the boundary? What are the things that Mike Denbrock likes to do as Notre Dame's play caller so that USC fans can be on the lookout for that on Saturday night in South Bend?
See, I would like Mike Denbrock to go to the deep ball more, and I don't think he does enough of that because you take a look at, I just mentioned all those receivers, and there's some quality on there. I'm just wondering if maybe because Notre Dame historically is not a pass-heavy, receiver-heavy program, that maybe part of it is leaning more to the culture of laying more on the running game. And, it's not because that the running backs don't deserve it. Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, they definitely deserve it. And, Love, like I said, he'll be in the NFL next year. Price, we'll see. But I feel like that when they do open things up, they are shorter passes. And you only see like those big throws maybe once or twice a quarter. And, when it's third and short, fourth and short, I have questions sometimes about some of these draw plays that they draw up, no pun intended there, or CJ Carr, going, far behind the line of scrimmage, looking for I don't know. Sometimes I feel like they run into defensive schemes where when it's like third and short, fourth and short, and Carr takes this big step back. And then he realizes that, oh no, nobody's open, so I got to roll out and try and gain a yardage myself. And NC State, at least in the first half, showed that it can be done against Notre Dame. That if you take away their passing lanes and you force CJ Carr to make a decision to run, maybe throw the ball out of bounds, maybe if you're lucky, force an intentional grounding, then you will see a freshman quarterback. Freshman quarterback at college football's highest level. At the end of the day, they're still inexperienced, and you can only do so much as far as your talent goes, but if you are seeing opposing defenses adjust to you, then you're going to have a lot of problems. The offense, a lot better than what we've seen. In fact, I would say, this year Notre Dame is opening up a lot more with the passing game, because they recognize that they have a really good arm in CJ Carr. So I think they're slowly but surely, maybe they're easing him into the college game because, he's a redshirt freshman. He played one game against Purdue last year. All he did was take snaps, though. He didn't throw it all. So maybe as the season goes on, they will try and go to the deep ball a lot more. Now, will they really let him loose against USC? Well, again, that depends. Will USC have the personnel in order to put pressure on him? And I'm just going to say right now, they have very little chance of stopping Jeremiah Love. Jadarian Price is another guy you're probably going to have trouble stopping as well. So, they're going to get their yardages. They're going to get their touchdowns somehow, some way, because that's just who they are. So, if you could put pressure on CJ Carr, force him into these decisions, take away those passing lanes, make him do short passes, make him, look for just anybody to get himself out of trouble before the offensive line gives out. And again, it goes back to that starting center position that is suddenly open. Then USC will have a chance. But if that secondary is struggling, like you seem to be indicating that they are, then it's not going to matter. CJ Carr is just going to go crazy, and that's going to be the end of it. I'm not saying that to be rude. I'm just saying what's probably going to happen here. I want to be as classy as possible here.
Of course. Before we get to more questions from Ethan and Crash, we need to pay some bills here. So as a word from our sponsor, we will see you back in 1 minute.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select a betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.
And we remind you that Mark Rogers' national show here at the Voice of College Football, 6 nights a week, Monday through Saturday, 10 p.m. in the East, 7 p.m. in the West. All right, Ethan, more questions for Jeffrey Clark on our Notre Dame preview show.
Yeah, so Jeffrey, you talked a little bit about about Notre Dame's kind of perception of USC's defense there. I'm curious about turning it over to the offensive side of the ball. Like USC obviously has at least in all the statistical rankings, like nationally so far, a top 3 offense in the country. So I'm just curious, like how you feel, you yourself and Notre Dame fans view USC's offense. What do you think are things that you're nervous about from a Notre Dame perspective? What are, areas that you believe that Notre Dame can have success against USC's offense? Like how do you think Notre Dame should approach this? Kind of your thoughts on all those.
I feel like Notre Dame has, the defense in order to shut anybody down at the base of this particular moment, because until they prove that they're back to what they were at the start of the season, anybody that's going to go up against them is going to have a hard time moving the ball. The question is, will Notre Dame allow their opponents to get off to a good start? And don't be too fooled by that 4-game winning streak, because that is somewhat misleading in the sense that in a lot of these cases, Notre Dame's defense has allowed the opponent to get comfortable early on. Now, the good news, if you're a Notre Dame fan, is that whatever adjustments they make in the locker room, pay off, because by the second half, the offense is just not the opposing offense is just not moving the ball. The nervous thing that I have is Notre Dame's ability to stop the big play. And again, it doesn't matter if it's in the first quarter, if it's in the fourth quarter. Notre Dame oftentimes is uncharacteristically prone to giving up some of these big plays. And, every college football team, gives them a big play every now and then. But strangely enough, a lot of that happens at home. And, you would expect Notre Dame to just flat out dominate at home. But, it seems like, I don't know how often this happens, really, but at least I feel like we see these big plays for these 60-yard scores, 70-yard scores, 80-yard scores. Okay, maybe not 80-yard scores, but just beyond midfield, you'll see someone air out a pass that will go for a touchdown. So here is my advice to you: if you are an opposing offense, get your points in as early and often as you possibly can, because Notre Dame, for whatever reason, as dominant as they are on defense, has a tendency to be a little lax out of the gate. And if you don't score early and often, then you are going to find yourself at the mercy of a defense that's not going to let you move the ball at all, or they are going to force you into 4-down territory, and you're not going to be successful at that, or they are going to force a turnover. Now, the question is, is there enough time, before halftime for a team to get out early and often, either by touchdowns or by field goals or, God forbid, a safety? I don't think so personally. I mean, we haven't really seen that, especially at home. Texas A&M seems to be the outlier right here, and they're a top 4 team. So I think it's pretty obvious as to where we stand. I can't really point to anyone specifically that Notre Dame should be concerned about on USC's offense, but they do have some personnel that will make you pay if you are not ready for when that second half act hits the fan. I know we are going to see a dominant Notre Dame defense at some point. The question is, when are we going to see it, and how far back or how far ahead will USC be when that happens? So it's not a question of when Notre Dame locks down, or if Notre Dame locks down defense. It's a matter of when, and it would definitely happen, at least in my opinion, no later than the midpoint of the third quarter, and that's being generous, I think.
Yeah, you don't have to point out who's dominant on USC. That's our job. It's like Makai Lemon. You want to guard that guy. Yeah, that's who Notre Dame wants to stop. All right, Crash, your next question for Jeffrey.
Kind of building off of Ethan's question, I kind of want to ask you, just based on what you've seen, just would you say Notre Dame's strength is more in its offense or its defense? Because kind of looking at the scores, obviously they've had the 2 close losses, one those really high scoring, one more in the middle. And other than that, they've kind of just been blowing everyone out. So therefore, you kind of are seeing just really both the offenses and defense playing pretty well for the most part. But so what would you say has kind of been Notre Dame's strength?
It really has depended on what week we're talking about here, right? The offense, I would say, was the more dominant unit for the first month of the season. That's evidenced by the fact that they have not scored fewer than 24 points all season. They have back-to-back 56-point showings against Purdue and then Arkansas. And I think a lot of people thought that that was going to continue, at least to some degree. But it hasn't. At least they thought Boise State would be another high-scoring game, and Boise State, to their credit, held to 28 points. But Notre Dame has only given up 1 touchdown against Boise State and then NC State. And then I mentioned that it was a 7-7 game. I mentioned it was 10-7 at halftime. It was a 7-7 game against NC State, but then Notre Dame shut them out the rest of the way because it was 7-7, 36-7, so that's 29 unanswered points. I think my math's right there. So I would say that the vibe is shifting back more towards the defense being the dominant unit. That it does not mean at all, though, that the offense has tailed off, because they still score 36 points against Boise State. And all indications are that Notre Dame is going to get at least 4 touchdowns, probably 5 touchdowns against USC. And, of course, if you're a Notre Dame fan in the stands, that means a lot of push-ups, or people lifting you up for push-ups. So if you're a USC fan, knows Notre Dame fan culture is like, that's a thing. And if you don't know that, well, I just told you. But I think Notre Dame has to say that, both of its units are on pretty even ground right now. And again, up until a couple of weeks ago, I would have said that the offense is the bigger unit right now, more successful unit right now, but it's slowly shifting back towards the defense. And I'm not saying that it's not going to shift back towards the offense. I mean, although I could see why, because historically Notre Dame's defense is a lot stronger than its offense. But with CJ Carr, you cannot count out how well this unit is going to be at scoring. And with some inferior competition coming up, especially, do not count out more 300-yard games for CJ Carr and 3 touchdown games, maybe even 4 touchdown games. It's not a matter of if he'll have more of those this year, but when he's going to have that. Will it happen against USC? I don't know, maybe. But it will happen at some point this year. So, again, I can't really answer which one's more down right now. I would say the defense, but this is about as even as I have seen both of these units for a while now.
All right, a little bit of a shift in our show. I've been having a rotation with Ethan and Crash joining with me and asking questions. Now I'm going to become MC. It's going to move to a roundtable format. So we're going to get some of Ethan's and Crash's opinions mixed into the show. So roundtable item number 1. We will start, of course, with Jeffrey. He's our guest, so the guest goes first. Your most important position group matchup in this game, and you can include coaches if you want, a coordinator versus coach, coordinator versus coordinator, but it can be unit versus unit. or it could be player versus player. Your most important matchup, you think that is going to be the number one decider or likely indicator of how this game goes?
I think it goes back to the discussion we've been having, and it's the Notre Dame receiving core versus the USC secondary. If the passing efficiency is as good for CJ Carr as advertised, and if the opponent passing efficiency for all of Notre Dame's opponents, including SEC or USC, I'm getting those two mixed up. I think that if those numbers are accurately showing, then once CJ Carr gets open, assuming he does get open at all, it's really going to come down to, will the Trojan secondary keep up with that receiving core? If I had to take a guess, I would say, and of course, me being a Notre Dame guy, I got to say it, my answer is no. I'd be remiss if I said otherwise.
Ethan, your biggest matchup in this game?
Sure. I'm really torn between two, so I'm going to go with one on each side of the ball. I'm going to go with just like the overall USC defense against the Notre Dame running backs, just because I think that USC can, with the high-powered offense that USC possesses, I think that they can endure a great game from CJ Carr and still win if they shut down the Notre Dame run game. But I am really, really nervous about them actually doing that, not just because of Jeremiah Love, but because of Jadarian Price, because he actually was the better rusher last year against USC in the Coliseum. Jeremiah Love had 99 yards and a touchdown on 13 carries, and then Jadarian Price had 111 yards and a touchdown on 12 carries. So, and USC, especially last year, lost some games because they weren't ready to defend backup running backs. That's the reason why they lost the Michigan game, and definitely a reason why they struggled so much against Notre Dame as well. And then on the other side of the ball, I think it's Jaden Mayava versus the Notre Dame secondary, just because, this Notre Dame secondary is really opportunistic. They have 8 picks and have only allowed 1 touchdown in the last 3 games. So, and Jaden Mayava obviously has had an incredible season, a Heisman caliber season. He's a much different player than Notre Dame fans saw last year in the Coliseum. But he has, last year his weakness was, and in the Illinois game as well, was when he threw an interception, things kind of trailed off a little bit. So, rebounded a lot better from his interception against Michigan. But I just, if he, in a game where he makes multiple big mistakes, I don't know, how I feel about his mentality. Haven't really seen that kind of a game from him yet. So if he can, stay calm and not let these opportunistic Notre Dame secondary defenders get involved and, hit his guys, then I think USC's offense will be very successful. Especially considering that they have, their top 2 running backs down in this game and are relying on starting walk-on, and then their third string backing him up. They kind of need the passing game to be involved. I'm fairly confident that the running game will do well, but I think that they need to get the passing game involved regardless, to set up that running game doing well and put those guys in as big of a position to succeed as possible. So if Mayava can hit his guys and he doesn't, let Notre Dame get more than 1 interception in this game, I think that, USC will be in a really good spot.
Crash, your biggest matchup?
So I'm also torn on a couple. I think, Jeffrey, I agree with you that obviously Notre Dame's receivers versus the USC secondary, I think, is a big one. I mean, that was a big part of why I asked you earlier in the show, was because I think that's a big concern based on what I've seen, especially in that Illinois game and some of those previous games. But I'm also wondering, especially with Ashton Craig out at center, can USC also play really suffocating? Can the USC D-line be really suffocating and really just put a lot of pressure on CJ Carr, who's, freshman starting for the first time at quarterback, and make him struggle like they did against Bryce Underwood last week? So I'm really curious, is that maybe more of one, just the USC D-line versus the Notre Dame O-line, especially that potential weakness and vulnerability at the Notre Dame center? So I'm kind of torn between those two because of just that potential vulnerability. If USC can, get through the center, can they put a lot of pressure on CJ Carr and keep him in trouble? Or is it going to be, if they don't, can CJ Carr unload the ball and exploit USC's weakness in the secondary?
My biggest matchup in this game, this is the theme that I've been writing: USC defensive line. Can the USC defensive line make the game uncomfortable for a quarterback I think very highly of, CJ Carr? To me, Michigan's not very good. I'm just going to say it. I don't think Michigan's very good. Like, Bryce Underwood is a long-term project. He's not a quick fix. You know, we might not see the best of Bryce Underwood, not just next year. This could be a 3-year project, but we're not going to see the best of him this year. So Michigan does not have great receivers either. Like, it was just a matchup where Michigan did not have the high-end talent to bother USC's defense, and I think Notre Dame does. But with Notre Dame's starting center out, and let's take note, this is a battle of backup centers. You know, USC is without Killian O'Connor, its opening day starting center. So it's a battle of the backups. That's a really intriguing specific plot point. But generally, the USC defensive line, which, you know, didn't show up the last time it went to the Midwest, going to Illinois, that USC defensive line has to make the game uncomfortable for Notre Dame. And if it doesn't, Trojans are in for a long night. Okay, another roundtable question. The betting line. Now, Jeffrey, you've said you're not a betting man. Okay, get that disclaimer out there. But Notre Dame opened as a 9-point favorite, and that line has actually moved up half a point. I thought that was going to get bet down to 8, maybe even 7.5, but no, line's moving up, and that's with Notre Dame's starting center out. So, like, that tells me the market expects this USC defense to get fricasseed and flambéed and just all around smoked by Notre Dame. But Jeffrey, you're not a betting man, but you have to think that line -9 now, -9.5. That's a real eye opener. What do you think about that line?
I mean, it's kind of surprising considering the injury that we have been talking about. I feel like Notre Dame is very dominant at home against USC. I will say right now, for those who may not remember, those who don't know, the last time USC won in South Bend was way back in 2011. And, you know, that is right before Notre Dame had its run to the BCS title game the following year. Well, that's not to say that Notre Dame is going to get into the title game in 2026, but assuming USC does win. But it does really interest me that the line would move in that direction because, I mean, you know, you would think that with Notre Dame losing its starting center, that, you know, the line would probably move in the opposite direction. Like you just say yourself, how surprised you are about it. So I think what this says is that the market is very bullish on Notre Dame's defense and what the offense has been able to accomplish. And also, you know, you said yourself, you don't think Michigan is a very good team. And you know, you said as well, USC's secondary is kind of exposed against Illinois. So if Notre Dame's receiving core, like I've been saying over and over again right now, is able to get loose, then this game could get out of hand really fast. You know, personally, you know, like I said, I'm not a betting man, but I would probably take the over if I was in this situation. You know, just because, you know, historically, at least recently, Notre Dame has done well against the Trojans in South Bend. And, you know, even if you take a look at recent history in LA, you know, Notre Dame has had a lot of success. I think Caleb Williams' last home game against Notre Dame was the last time USC beat Notre Dame, you know, at all. So I think just based on the history and the vibes that are coming from the quality of opponents and the vibes that are coming from, you know, what both these teams have been able to accomplish one way or the other, whether ugly, whether really enthusiastically, whether really competently. You know, I guess when you take a look at it, I guess it's really not that big of a surprise.
Ethan, plus 9.5, like USC folks. I mean, you know, do you look at the Vegas line and say, hey, we got to really prove a point? I mean, that can be overplayed, but gosh, you have to think some guys in that USC locker room are paying attention to that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think you go in and you go in with that chip on your shoulder. I'll briefly touch on why I think that's the line, and then I'll touch on what I think of the line. I think the line is what it is because of USC's running back situation. You know, I think people have been really impressed with the Trojan offense this year, especially because of the balance that Lincoln Riley's been able to employ, with the running game and the passing game, both functioning at a really high octane, I would say. But I think that, people saw, oh, Wayman Jordan's out. Oh, Eli Sanders is out. Who's starting? Oh, it's a walk-on. He had a good game against Michigan, but can he do it again? That Michigan defensive line really got bullied. So I think that situation is really kind of the reason why people and USC's just struggles on the road. The USC didn't win a single real Big Ten road game last year. And, they struggled on the road in 2022 or in 2023 as well. And then, this year they lost against Illinois, a game that they honestly should have won. So in multiple aspects. So I think, people are just really wary of supporting USC on the road. And especially, going to South Bend. I mean, they really struggled the last time they went in 2023. Their whole season was derailed because of it. I think if you're a betting person, you should absolutely bet on USC to cover, or even USC outright, because I think there's a couple reasons why. One, I think, is because USC comes into this game with a lot less to lose. I think winning the Michigan game really takes a lot of pressure off of the USC program, takes a lot of pressure off of Lincoln Riley, Danton Lynn, everybody in the building. And I think like Jeffrey so keenly mentioned, like if Notre Dame loses this game, their shot at making the college football playoff is not zero, but it's pretty close, because AP poll voters and college football playoff voters are going to look at, oh, they were 0-3 against ranked opponents, because this will likely be the last ranked opponent that they face. And, it's really hard to justify putting a team in to compete with the top, 11, 12 teams in the country if every time that they've played a ranked opponent, they've lost, even if they have been close games. So I think that this is, Notre Dame's last shot at, putting something on their resume that's real solid and proves that they deserve a chance at the playoff. So I think that the onus is on them. The pressure is on them. And I think USC is, playing with house money a little bit. I mean, they're still trying to compete for the playoff. There's still pressure on them. There's still pressure on Lincoln Riley to win this game. I think that winning this game changes the dynamic of the conversation around continuing the rivalry from a USC perspective dramatically. So I think that that's also an element of pressure that not a lot of people are talking about. But I do think USC is playing with house money a little bit. And I also think that, I just trust the offense to go in and play a lot more of a composed game. And, even last year, like USC played Notre Dame in the Coliseum, and it was 35-28 with Notre Dame punting back to USC with, and their offense with the chance to go down and tie the game. And then obviously they looked like they were about to. They were in the red zone. And then Mayaba threw an interception that was returned 99 yards for a touchdown. And then the next drive, they go down, try to score again, and pick six all the way, returned for a touchdown. So I think, that was a different version of Mayaba, first and foremost, completely different player this year. That was, USC's running game depth, I would say, was less, even with the top two guys out. I think USC still has a very deep running back room. The receivers are obviously who they are. You have a Blitnikoff candidate, Mekhi Lemon, and then you have Jacoby Lane, who's probably going to be an NFL star as well. So I just think that, I'm still not as confident in the defense and, can't definitively say that they're going to go shut Notre Dame down. I think that this offense is well equipped to catch up and hang with anybody, even against some of the tougher defenses in the country. So that's why, I really just don't see a situation where USC gets blown out in this game, because I think that their offense will keep them in it, even if the defense struggles.
Crash.
So I think this line is probably getting wider because I think just the running backs being out, Wayman Jordan, Eli Sanders, like you said, Ethan. But I think especially King Miller, I think he had a great game against Michigan. And like I said on Sunday, I'm still standing by that. I think that was the biggest win of Lincoln Riley's USC tenure. But at the same time, like you were saying earlier, Matt, Michigan is not going to be one of those top teams this year. So therefore, while Miller had his best game, it's still just, can he do it against, a top 15 team? So I think that's going to be the big thing. And then the other thing is, I think everyone's been touching on, is USC has struggled on the road, especially against ranked teams in the past few years. So I think that's another reason why people are wondering, especially, good Notre Dame team. They struggled against Illinois. Yes, they beat Purdue, on the road for a true, like, out of state in the Midwest Big Ten win earlier this year, but Purdue's 2-4 now. I mean, I think they've improved, but they're still near the bottom of the Big Ten. So I think for those two reasons, people are going to be more nervous about betting on USC when they're saying, okay, their top two running backs are out. They got a walk-on who's going to have to prove himself in an even bigger game this week. And the status of the third stringer in Brian Jackson is up in the air right now. Is he going to even be able to play it? And if so, how much? Combined with the fact of USC's recent history of struggles, especially when you're playing good ranked teams. So I think for those two reasons, that's really what's, I think, driving it to be an even wider spread.
All right, Jeffrey Clark of the Voice of College Football has been so generous with his time. We got to get him out of here since he's to the east of us. It's an hour later where he is. So as we wind things up, and Jeffrey, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us tonight. Cards on the table, predicted score for USC Notre Dame 2025.
I'm going to say, and again, I say this with all the love and respect that you guys have shown me coming into enemy territory right here, and I say this with all the love and respect for all the people watching. Let's see, I'm going to say Notre Dame 38, USC 21. I'll give USC a little bit of credit, even if they are having issues with their running backs right now. That's still an NFL talent under center there in LA. So, I got to think that he's going to, have his moments. And if he doesn't have his moments, well, that's just a testament to what Notre Dame's defense has become over these past few weeks, especially. So, maybe I'm being a little bit generous because, I don't want to be that super fans, Bob Swirsky saying, Notre Dame 98-0. And because, that's obviously a big thing here, where I'm at. But, I'm not going to be that guy. I want to be, as kind and as unhurtful as I possibly can. And, Matt, if you don't believe what I'm saying, I apologize, but I'm trying to get on everybody's good side right here. But look, this is the thing about the Notre Dame USC rivalry and why it can't go away. We don't like each other's teams, but at the same time, we all respect the rivalry and we respect each other.
Jeffrey, I know you're a huge baseball fan. You're a huge White Sox guy. My Mariners are about to potentially make the World Series. I want people who are going to call balls and strikes accurately. I want you to say exactly what you think, nothing more, nothing less, nothing else. If you think Notre Dame's going to beat USC by 17, that's what we came here to hear. Your honest take. So anyway, at Trojans Wire, we're going to say Notre Dame Rider takes the Irish minus 16.5. No, just kidding. But no, we want you to call balls and strikes. Next year we have ABS. Thank goodness. So just tell it like it is from your perspective, and you've done that tonight, Jeffrey. We really appreciate it. All right, Ethan, your predicted score for this game.
Did you lose him? We lost him.
My mic went out.
There you go.
It is back. All right. I think I've got USC winning this one 35-31. I think that they are going to continue that Jade Mayawa is going to continue to have success. I think that, he's going to go into a hostile Notre Dame environment, be calm, collected, be himself. I think that, the USC running game is going to be playing with a chip on their shoulder because it's all the unproven guys now. You got King Miller starting, hopefully newly christened with a scholarship. Lincoln Riley said that it's only a matter of time before he gets one, and it's when, not if. So he will be getting one hopefully ahead of the game. And then, Brian Jackson, it sounds like, came up with a clean bill of health after that game, after the Michigan game as well. So he should be back. Then you've got the freshman Harry Dalton and Riley Wormley set to factor in as well. So I can count on, I think, one of those four guys to step up and make an impact. And then, there's just so much talent in the receiving core. Hopefully you'll have a little bit of a healthier Lake McCree as well at tight end. And I think that, just all that firepower is going to be enough to overcome a bit of a rougher game for USC defensively, especially being on the road and playing in potentially colder, wet weather. And, not quite as great of a game as the Michigan game. But I think that, there's a lot to build on from the Michigan game. And I think that USC is going to take just enough of it over to South Bend to pull this one out, and more of a high-scoring game, but a game that favors the Trojans nonetheless.
I'm going with more of a low-scoring game. I got this one at 24-21 USC. I think just based on what we've been talking about, especially with Jeffrey saying that Notre Dame's defense, in your opinion, is kind of seems like right now is a bit more of their strength compared to their offense. I mean, you did say it's kind of pretty equal. So I think based on that, and I'm also confident USC's defense is going to find a way to just build on the momentum of last week and make CJ Carr uncomfortable, especially with Ashton Craig out. So I think it's going to be more a defensive game. It's going to come down to possibly, I think, just USC only winning by a field goal. So that's why I got this one pretty low scoring at 24-21.
Okay, so I think I'm running to the betting window USC plus the 9.5, but I do think Notre Dame wins this game outright. Notre Dame 42, USC 35. I do think it's going to be a Wild West shootout. You know, here's the deal. USC has earned my trust in big home games, but now USC still hasn't earned my trust in a big road game. Like this is the mountain USC has to climb, and like until Lincoln Riley proves this, you know, he didn't win in South Bend 2 years ago. He didn't win in Salt Lake City against Utah. I mean, he came close, but you don't get prizes at USC for coming close. So I do think USC scores plenty because, you know, my grandmother could contain this NC State offense that Notre Dame just mopped up. Dave Doran's on the hot seat in Raleigh with the Wolfpack. I think the jump in competition and specifically the jump in speed, like Mekhi Lemon's going to get his. He's going to eat. He's going to rack up plenty of production. And if Notre Dame's focusing on him, Jacoby Lane, also Lake McCree, Walker Lyons, they're gonna get their share of big plays. So like it's not going to be like 2023, partly because, you know, also USC's offensive line, as Jeffrey remembers well, just got trampled, and Caleb Williams had no chance. It just snowballed on USC in the first half. This USC offensive line is actually coached well by Zach Hansen, you know, the overlooked person in the USC firmament right now. And I think, you know, I'm not worried about how USC's offense is going to play. But I think Michigan's offense sucks. Sorry if there are any Wolverine fans listening to that, but I think that's just the reality. I think Sharon Moore is in over his head. And Notre Dame, CJ Carr, Mike Denbrock, that's a professional operation. They're going to give USC problems, I think. And USC's defense, hey, you want to prove me wrong? Be my guest. I'd love to have some egg on my face. But, of course, I am running to the window for USC plus the 9.5. So it's not as though I have a total lack of faith. I just don't think when push comes to shove, you know, if this game is close in the fourth quarter, USC is going to be able to make the really big plays on defense to bring this one home. But I do think the offense scores enough to keep this one close. All right, so it's getting late. Jeffrey Clark, formerly of Fighting Irish Wire, I was about to say, now our Notre Dame correspondent here at the Voice of College Football, vocfb.com. He writes about Notre Dame and the national scene, interesting national stories, 2 stories a day, every day. Like he's our machine for the Voice of College Football website. So we thank Jeffrey for his contributions there and for spending, well, not just an hour, it was all close to 75 minutes with us tonight to preview USC Notre Dame 2025. So as we thank Jeffrey, we also want to mention USC Notre Dame postgame live Sunday, 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 p.m. in the East. Ethan, Crash Lake Collier, and myself, Matt Zemek, will review the Notre Dame game. But follow Jeffrey. He's going to write, of course, a post-gamer for this USC Notre Dame game that will appear on the Voice of College Football website. So follow Jeffrey for continuing coverage of Notre Dame and National College Football the rest of the year. Jeffrey, thank you. And everyone, thanks for watching this special edition of the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. We'll see you next time.
Bye.